What if the ground beneath us is hiding entire cities we barely understand? Across deserts, river valleys, and ancient plains, there are structures that look simple at first. A massive brick basin in India, stone lines stretching across Arabia, towering burial mounds in North America. And yet the more we study them, the more their purpose begins to blur. Were ships docking in Lothal 4,000 years ago? Why did ancient hunters reshape entire landscapes just to guide animals into stone traps? And how did a city like Cahokia rise into one of the largest in its world, only to fade into silence? And before we begin, wherever you are in the world right now, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it there as you listen? Now let's begin. The skull tower of Tenochtitlan, bones beneath the cathedral. Beneath the heart of modern Mexico City, where traffic moves steadily and cathedral bells echo across stone plazas, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected. A circular tower, built not from stone alone, but from human skulls. This is the story of the skull tower of Tenochtitlan. In 2017, during restoration work near the Metropolitan Cathedral, researchers excavating part of the ancient ceremonial centre of the Mexican capital revealed a structure long described in Spanish colonial accounts. It was known as the Huey Tzompantli, the Great Skull Rack. The Mexica, often called the Aztecs, built their capital, Tenochtitlan, on an island in Lake Texcoco in the 14th century. By the early 1500s, it had grown into one of the largest cities in the world, with temples, canals, markets, and causeways linking it to the mainland. At the centre of the city stood the Templo Mayor, the main ceremonial pyramid dedicated to the deities Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. Near this sacred space, skull racks displayed the heads of individuals sacrificed in ritual ceremonies. Spanish conquistadors, arriving in 1519, wrote descriptions of these racks, long wooden beams threaded with skulls. Some accounts claimed thousands were displayed at once. For centuries, historians debated whether those descriptions were exaggerated. Then the excavation confirmed it. The structure uncovered was not simply a wooden rack. It included a cylindrical tower constructed with skulls embedded in mortar, forming a solid architectural element. More than 650 skulls have been identified within the tower so far, and research continues. The skulls belong to men, women, and even children. This discovery challenged earlier assumptions that the victims were exclusively captured warriors. Osteological analysis revealed diversity in age and sex, suggesting a more complex ritual practice. To understand the skull tower, it is important to step into the worldview of the Mexica civilization. In Mexica, cosmology, sacrifice was not seen as cruelty for its own sake. It was embedded within a belief system that held the universe in delicate balance. The sun required nourishment to continue rising. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humans reciprocated through ritual offerings. Life and death were intertwined in cycles of renewal. The Tzompantli, skull rack, served both religious and political purposes. It demonstrated devotion to the gods, and it also projected power. For a growing empire, the display communicated strength to allies and enemies alike. Tenochtitlan itself was a marvel of engineering. Built upon marshland, it featured chinampas, artificial agricultural islands, canals for transport, and organised districts. When Hernán Cortés and his forces entered the city, they described it with astonishment. They also described the skull displays with horror. Spanish chroniclers often framed the Mexica as barbaric to justify conquest. While human sacrifice was indeed practiced, colonial accounts sometimes amplified numbers and imagery to reinforce moral superiority. Modern archaeology allows a more grounded view. The skull tower stands not as a legend, but as a physical structure shaped by historical reality. The skulls were carefully arranged, drilled on the sides to allow placement on wooden beams before being incorporated into masonry. The circular design suggests permanence. It was not temporary spectacle, it was built to endure. Standing today in the Templo Mayor archaeological zone, one sees layers of history. Aztec stone foundations sit beside colonial architecture. The metropolitan cathedral rises where sacred pyramids once stood. Beneath those layers, the skull tower remained hidden for centuries. The excavation revealed how urban space transforms, but never entirely erases what came before. Modern Mexico City rests directly above the capital of the Mexica Empire. The skull tower forces reflection. It confronts modern viewers with a practice that feels distant and unsettling, yet within its original context, it functioned within a coherent cosmology. Ritual sacrifice existed in many ancient cultures, though expressed differently. The Mexica Empire expanded rapidly during the 15th century, incorporating surrounding regions through tribute and alliance. Ceremonial displays reinforced imperial authority, but empires shift. In 1521, Tenochtitlan fell to Spanish forces after a prolonged siege. The city was dismantled, temples were destroyed, colonial structures rose above the ruins. The skull tower was buried. Time covered it with debris, foundations, and new streets. And then, 5 centuries later, it emerged again. Archaeologists carefully documented each skull, each layer of mortar. The process was slow and meticulous. The discovery was not theatrical, it was scientific. The tower does not glorify violence. It testifies to belief. It reveals how societies interpret life, death, and cosmic order. In the center of Mexico City, surrounded by modern movement and sound, the excavation site remains a quiet window into the 15th century. The skulls are preserved behind protective barriers. Visitors walk past slowly. The story of the skull tower of Tenochtitlan is not one of myth, it is one of evidence. It shows how archaeology can confirm parts of written history while also correcting exaggeration. And as evening falls over the Zocalo and city lights begin to glow where temples once stood, the memory of that circular tower remains beneath the cathedral, a reminder that beneath every modern city there are older worlds still waiting quietly in the earth. The Roman crucifixion, heel bone, a nail through history. In 1968, during construction work in northeastern Jerusalem, archaeologists uncovered a rock-cut tomb dating back to the 1st century. Inside were several limestone ossuaries, small bone boxes used during the Second Temple period. The bones of the deceased had been carefully gathered after decomposition and placed inside these containers, a common Jewish burial practice of the time. Among those remains, one discovery stood apart, a heel bone pierced by an iron nail. This is the story of the Roman crucifixion heel bone, the remains of a man named Yehohanan. The ossuary bore an inscription, Yehohanan, son of Hakol. His identity is known not from legend, but from carved stone. He lived and died in Roman-occupied Judea during the 1st century CE, a time marked by tension, rebellion, and imperial control. When archaeologists examined the bones, they found an iron nail approximately 11 centimeters long driven laterally through the calcaneus, the heel bone. The nail had bent at its tip, likely striking a knot in the wood of the cross. Because the nail bent, it could not easily be removed after death, and so it remained embedded in bone for nearly 2,000 years. This was the first clear archaeological evidence of crucifixion ever discovered. Crucifixion is known extensively from Roman historical sources, and it was a public execution method used primarily for slaves, rebels, and criminals. The punishment was designed not only to kill, but to deter. Victims were typically affixed to wooden structures by ropes, nails, or a combination of both. but until the discovery of Yehohanan's remains, physical confirmation was absent. The find changed that. The positioning of the nail suggests that his feet were placed on either side of the wooden upright, with the nail driven through both heels into the wood. This differs from the common artistic depiction of feet overlapped and nailed through the front. His forearm bones also showed possible signs of trauma, though no nail was preserved there. It is possible that his arms were tied rather than nailed. Analysis of the skeleton revealed that Yehohanan was a young man, likely in his 20s. There were no obvious signs of severe disease. He appears to have been otherwise healthy. His execution likely followed political unrest in Judea, where resistance to Roman rule periodically erupted. Crucifixion was often used as a punishment for insurrection. Jerusalem in the 1st century was a city under occupation. Roman soldiers maintained control. Tensions between local populations and imperial authority ran high. Executions were carried out publicly. The cross stood as a warning. And yet, after death, Yehohanan was given a proper Jewish burial. His family retrieved his body and placed him in a tomb according to custom. This detail is significant. It suggests that despite Roman execution, local burial traditions continued. The bent nail itself is a powerful artifact. Iron corrodes over time, yet this one survived. Its curve at the end preserves the moment of impact. The wood of the cross did not survive. Only the nail and bone remain. Scholars debated early interpretations of the find. Initial reports suggested that a wooden plaque might have been placed between the nail head and the heel to prevent tearing. Later reanalysis questioned this detail, proposing that what appeared to be wood was simply mineral residue. Such debates reflect the careful nature of archaeological study. Conclusions are tested and retested, but the core evidence remains clear. A man named Yehohanan was executed by crucifixion in 1st century Jerusalem. His heel bone still carries the nail. The discovery adds tangible reality to historical descriptions. Roman authors such as Seneca and Josephus wrote about crucifixion in graphic terms. Now, archaeology provides physical confirmation. The find also deepens understanding of the broader historical context of Judea under Roman rule. Within a few decades of Yehohanan's death, Jerusalem would experience major revolt, leading to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Violence, resistance, and imperial power shaped daily life. Standing today in Jerusalem, layers of history overlap. Ancient stones lie beneath modern streets. Construction continues to reveal fragments of earlier eras. The heel bone of Yehohanan is now preserved in museum collections in Israel. It is small, it is quiet, yet it carries immense weight. It is not a symbol carved in stone, it is bone pierced by iron. It reminds us that crucifixion was not metaphor, it was method, it was physical, it was human. In the stillness of a museum display case, beneath controlled lighting and protective glass, the nail remains embedded. 2,000 years have passed, empires have risen and fallen, beliefs have changed, but the bent iron nail in that heel bone still holds the imprint of a single moment when wood, iron and flesh intersected under the authority of Rome. And in that silent fragment of bone from Jerusalem, history feels closer than legend, grounded not in story alone, but in the enduring evidence of the human body itself. Mount Kailash, the Forbidden Peak. In the far western region of Tibet, rising from the windswept plateau like a solitary monument of stone and ice, stands a mountain unlike any other. Its slopes are sharply defined. Its summit forms a near-symmetrical peak, and no human has ever officially stood at its top. This is Mount Kailash. At first glance, the mountain's appearance captures attention. Its north face, etched with horizontal striations of snow and rock, gives it a striking geometric presence. From certain angles it resembles a pyramid. its ridgelines almost too precise against the vast Tibetan sky. But Mount Kailash is not mysterious because of its shape alone. It is sacred. For more than 1,000 years, Mount Kailash has been one of the most revered spiritual sites in Asia. In Hinduism, it is believed to be the abode of Lord Shiva, the cosmic force of creation and destruction. In Buddhism, it represents Mount Meru, the mythical centre of the universe. It is also sacred to followers of Jainism and the ancient Bon tradition. 4 major rivers, the Indus, Sutlej, Brahmaputra and Karnali, originate near the region surrounding Kailash. These waterways sustain millions of people across South Asia. For believers, this geographical reality deepens the mountain's spiritual symbolism. Life flows from its base, yet the summit remains untouched. Unlike Mount Everest or other Himalayan peaks, Mount Kailash has never been climbed. There have been proposals. In the 20th century, a few mountaineers expressed interest in ascending it, but permits were denied. The reason is not technical difficulty alone, it is reverence. Climbing the mountain would be considered desecration by many pilgrims. The peak is not viewed as an obstacle to conquer, but as a divine presence to honour. Instead of climbing, devotees perform a ritual known as the Kora, a 52-kilometre circumambulation around the mountain's base. The journey takes several days at high altitude, crossing rocky terrain and mountain passes. Pilgrims walk slowly. Some prostrate themselves fully on the ground with each step, measuring the path with their bodies. The Kora is not easy. The air is thin, weather changes quickly, yet thousands undertake the journey each year. Mount Kailash's pyramid shape has fueled modern speculation. Some observers claim its symmetry suggests artificial construction. Others argue that it is evidence of a lost ancient civilization or hidden structure beneath the ice. But geologists describe the mountain as a natural formation shaped by tectonic uplift and erosion. The Himalayas were formed by the collision of the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates. Over millions of years, rock layers were pushed upward, folded, and carved by wind and ice. The striations visible on Kailash's face are sedimentary layers, natural geological patterns formed long before human history. Nature, given enough time, produces symmetry. Still, the mountain's isolation adds to its aura. The Tibetan plateau is vast and remote. Harsh winters sweep across the land. Snow covers ridges for much of the year. The sky feels closer here, the light sharper. Standing at a distance, Mount Kailash rises alone, its white crown luminous against darker rock. Its silence feels deliberate. In the 20th century, the region became politically sensitive. Access to Tibet shifted under Chinese governance. Travel restrictions limited foreign presence for decades. This partial isolation contributed to speculation. When places are difficult to reach, imagination fills the gap. There are stories of hidden entrances within the mountain, of inner chambers, of spiritual energy concentrated at its core. These stories blend mythology with modern fascination for the unexplained. But to pilgrims, the mystery is not about hidden technology or secret tunnels. It is about transcendence, the idea that some places should remain untouched. Mount Kailash stands at an elevation of approximately 6,638 metres. It is not the tallest mountain in the region. It is not technically the most difficult to climb. Its power lies not in height, but in meaning. The decision not to climb it represents a rare global consensus, a boundary respected. In an age where nearly every peak has been summited and mapped, Kailash remains symbolically intact. As pilgrims move along the Kora path, prayer flags flutter in thin air. Wind carries soft murmurs of mantra. Snow melts slowly in sunlight before refreezing at night. The mountain does not change quickly. It does not reveal itself easily. Whether viewed as the axis of the world, a sacred dwelling, or simply a remarkable geological formation, Mount Kailash holds a place beyond ordinary categorization. It is both real and revered, natural and symbolic, accessible yet unreachable, and in the high silence of Tibet, where sky stretches wide and rivers begin their long descent toward distant seas, the forbidden peak remains, not conquered, not measured by summit flags, but standing quietly as it has for ages, its pyramid-like face reflecting light beneath an endless horizon. The Mammoth Bone megastructure, circles of Ice Age survival. In the wide open plains of western Russia, where winters still arrive with deep cold and snow stretches across the horizon, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary beneath the frozen soil. A circle, not of stone, not of wood, but of mammoth bones. This is the story of the Mammoth Bone megastructure, a structure built nearly 25,000 years ago during the height of the last ice age. The site lies near the village of Kostenki along the Don River. This region has long been known for Paleolithic discoveries, tools, hearths, and evidence of early human settlement dating back tens of thousands of years. But in recent excavations, researchers revealed a circular structure composed of the remains of more than 60 woolly mammoths. Skulls, tusks, ribs, jawbones, carefully arranged in a ring approximately 12 meters in diameter. The structure dates to around 23,000 to 25,000 years ago, a time when much of Europe was gripped by glacial conditions. Temperatures were significantly lower than today. Forests were sparse. Steppe tundra dominated the landscape. For early human communities living in this environment, survival required adaptation. Mammoths were central to that adaptation. They provided meat for food, hide for clothing, fat for fuel, and bones, large, durable bones, for construction. The Mammoth Bone Circle at Kostenki was not the only such structure discovered in the region. Similar circular arrangements have been found across parts of Ukraine and Russia, suggesting a broader pattern of Ice Age habitation. But this particular structure is among the largest and most complex. Archaeologists believe that mammoth bones were used to create the base of a shelter. Skulls formed part of the outer ring. Large bones were stacked deliberately. The circle likely supported a superstructure of animal hides stretched over wooden or bone frames. At the centre of the circle, evidence of hearths was found, charred plant remains and traces of burning. This was not a random pile of bones, it was architecture, built during one of the harshest climatic periods in human history. Analysis of plant remains at the site revealed something surprising. Charred wood fragments from trees that were scarce in the immediate area. This suggests that inhabitants travelled significant distances to gather fuel. The Ice Age environment was unforgiving. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Food resources fluctuated. Yet humans did not merely survive. They organised space, constructed shelter, and maintained social groups. The mammoth bone structure reflects planning and cooperation. To gather the remains of 60 mammoths required time. Some bones likely came from hunted animals. Others may have been collected from natural mammoth grave sites. The bones were heavy. Transporting them demanded strength and coordination. The circular form may have provided structural stability against wind. A rounded shelter reduces exposure and distributes pressure evenly. In open steppe landscapes, wind can be relentless. Standing in the Russian plains today, one sees wide skies and distant horizons. Even now, winters in this region can be severe. Imagine the landscape 25,000 years ago, colder, harsher, covered in snow for much of the year. And in that frozen world, a ring of mammoth bones offered protection. The discovery challenges older assumptions about Paleolithic life. For a long time, early humans were imagined as constantly nomadic, moving lightly across the land. but structures like this suggest periods of longer-term settlement, perhaps seasonal occupation, perhaps even winter habitation. Inside the circle, families may have gathered around fire, stories may have been told, tools crafted, food prepared. The mammoth bone megastructure does not carry carvings or written messages. Its meaning comes from arrangement and context. It represents ingenuity under pressure. The Ice Age shaped human evolution. Climate forced adaptation. Groups that could innovate survived, using available materials. Even the remains of enormous Ice Age animals reflects practical intelligence. There is no mystery in the supernatural sense here. No lost advanced civilization. Only human resilience. Yet the structure feels monumental in its own way. Not because of height, but because of age. 25,000 years ago, long before pyramids, before agriculture, before written language, humans were shaping their environment deliberately. They were not passive inhabitants of the Ice Age, they were builders. The mammoth bone circle remained buried for millennia, preserved by sediment and time. Only through careful excavation did it re-emerge. Each bone was mapped and documented, each layer recorded. The cold soil that once sustained Ice Age communities now preserves their memory. In the quiet of the Russian plains, beneath shifting clouds and long winter skies, the mammoth bone megastructure stands again. Not rebuilt, but understood. A circle of survival, a ring of endurance, a reminder that even in the coldest chapters of human history, warmth was created, not just by fire, but by cooperation and design. And beneath that vast northern sky, where winter still returns each year, the ancient bones continue to tell their quiet story of resilience carved from ice and time. The ancient bear cult cave, ritual in the Ice Age. High in the Swiss Alps, above tree line and beyond the reach of easy paths, there is a cave carved into limestone rock. The wind moves sharply across the mountain face. Snow gathers in crevices. Inside the cave, the air remains cold and still. This is Drachenloch Cave. In the early 20th century, archaeologists exploring this alpine chamber made a discovery that would spark one of the most debated theories in Ice Age archaeology. Deep within the cave, they found clusters of cave bear bones, skulls, and long bones arranged in what appeared to be deliberate patterns. Some skulls were placed inside stone boxes or niches. Others were stacked in groups. To some researchers at the time, the conclusion seemed clear. This was evidence of an ancient bear cult. The excavations began in 1917, led by Swiss archaeologist Emil Beckler. Drachenloch Cave had already yielded thousands of cave bear remains, as the cave had served as a hibernation site for bears during the last Ice Age. But Beckler's attention focused not only on the abundance of bones, it focused on their arrangement. In certain areas, bear skulls appeared intentionally placed behind stone slabs. Long bones were gathered together in small compartments formed by natural rock formations. To Beckler, this suggested ritual behaviour by Neanderthals who once occupied the cave. The idea of a bear cult took hold. The theory proposed that Neanderthals hunted cave bears and then arranged their skulls ceremonially, perhaps in reverence or symbolic practice. If true, it would represent one of the earliest known examples of spiritual or ritual behaviour in human evolution. The image was powerful. Ice Age humans, honouring the animal that dominated their environment. Yet as archaeological methods advanced, interpretations shifted. Later researchers re-examined the Drachenloch site and questioned whether the bone arrangements were truly intentional. Caves are dynamic environments. Rockfalls occur. Animals disturb remains. Water moves bones across surfaces over time. Cave bears themselves may have shifted bones while occupying the space. Some scholars argued that the apparent stone boxes were natural rock formations rather than constructed containers. Others suggested that bones accumulated gradually through repeated bear hibernations, with occasional human interaction. The cave's elevation, over 2,400 metres above sea level, makes it an unlikely long-term habitation site for Neanderthals. Harsh alpine winters would have limited sustained occupation. Still, there is evidence that Neanderthals visited the cave periodically. Stone tools were found within the site. Cut marks on some bones indicate human activity, possibly butchering or scavenging. The question remains, were the skulls arranged deliberately, or did natural processes create the appearance of order? The debate reflects a broader theme in archaeology, the interpretation of intention. When we look at ancient remains, how do we distinguish ritual from coincidence? The early 20th century was a time when archaeologists were eager to find evidence of early spirituality. The idea of a Neanderthal bear cult fit into emerging narratives about symbolic behaviour. Today, interpretations are more cautious. Most researchers agree that while Neanderthals likely had complex cognitive abilities and may have practiced forms of ritual, the evidence at Drachenloch does not conclusively prove organised bear worship. Yet the site remains significant. It shows that humans and cave bears shared space during the Ice Age. It reveals how closely survival was tied to powerful animals. Cave bears were massive, larger than modern brown bears, and they dominated alpine caves for thousands of years. Entering a cave like Drachenloch during the Ice Age would have required awareness and risk. The cave interior today is quiet and dim. Light fades quickly as one moves deeper inside. Stone walls curve around narrow passages. The temperature drops. It is easy to imagine how the presence of large bear skulls might have felt imposing. Whether arranged intentionally or not, the concentration of bones created a powerful visual impression, and that impression shaped early interpretations. The concept of a bear cult is not entirely unique to Drachenloch. Other Paleolithic sites in Europe have yielded bear remains that some researchers interpret as ritual deposits. Across cultures, bears have often held symbolic significance, representing strength, endurance, and connection to wilderness. But symbolism leaves subtle traces. It does not always leave clear architectural markers. In the case of Drachenloch, the evidence remains open to interpretation. The cave itself stands as a window into Ice Age ecosystems. It reminds us that before agriculture, before cities, humans navigated a world shared with megafauna, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant bears. Life was shaped by climate and animal movement, and if Neanderthals did arrange those skulls intentionally, it would suggest early symbolic thinking. If they did not, the site still tells a story of coexistence and survival. High above the Swiss valleys, beneath snow and stone, Drachenloch Cave remains. Wind continues to sweep across the mountain. Ice forms in winter. The bones that once stirred debate now rest in museum collections. The question of the bear cult lingers quietly, not as confirmed ritual, but as a reminder of how fragile interpretation can be when we look back tens of thousands of years. In the stillness of the Alps, where rock shelters memory in darkness, the cave holds its silence, leaving us to wonder not only what happened there, but how we choose to understand the earliest chapters of human belief. The oldest footprints in the Americas, steps across white sands. In the desert of southern New Mexico, where bright gypsum dunes stretch toward distant mountains, the ground holds something fragile. Not stone tools, not bones, but footprints. Pressed into ancient sediment, preserved beneath layers of earth, these impressions represent some of the earliest known human steps in the Americas. This is the story of the White Sands footprints. Today, the area is protected within the White Sands National Park, a landscape of pale dunes formed from gypsum crystals. Wind reshapes the surface constantly, but beneath the shifting sands lies an older world, More than 20,000 years ago, this region was not a desert. It was the edge of a vast Ice Age lake known as Lake Otero. The climate was cooler and wetter. Grasses and wetlands surrounded the water's edge. Mammoths roamed here, giant ground sloths, dire wolves, and humans. In 2009, researchers surveying the area noticed faint impressions emerging from eroded lakebed deposits. Closer examination revealed something remarkable: clear human footprints, some small enough to belong to children. Over time, hundreds of footprints were documented. They stretched across ancient mudflats, preserved by a delicate process of burial and mineralization. When the lake receded and sediment accumulated, the impressions were sealed. Radiocarbon dating of seeds embedded in the same sediment layers placed the footprints between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. This date is significant. For decades, the widely accepted timeline suggested that humans arrived in the Americas around 13,000 to 15,000 years ago, associated with what archaeologists call the Clovis culture. But the White Sands footprints pushed that presence much earlier, into the last glacial maximum, when massive ice sheets covered much of North America. If humans were present in New Mexico more than 20,000 years ago, they would have arrived before the ice-free corridor between glaciers opened in Canada. This raises questions about migration routes. Perhaps early populations travelled along the Pacific coastline. Perhaps there were multiple waves of migration. The footprints themselves tell subtle stories. Some trackways show adults walking steadily across the mud. Others reveal children moving in shorter strides. In one sequence, an adult appears to carry a child for part of the journey, the deeper impressions suggesting added weight, before setting the child down again. In another area, human footprints intersect with those of mammoths and giant sloths. One set of sloth tracks shows signs of hesitation. The animal may have detected human presence. These details bring the Ice Age landscape into focus, not as abstract prehistory, but as movement, presence, daily life. Unlike stone tools, which require interpretation, footprints are direct. They capture a moment in motion, a foot pressed into soft ground, a step taken across a shoreline, a journey from one place to another. Preserving footprints over tens of thousands of years requires precise conditions. The mud must be firm enough to hold shape, yet soft enough to record detail. Rapid burial protects the impressions from erosion. At White Sands, alternating wet and dry cycles created ideal preservation. Today, researchers use ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation to reveal additional tracks. Many remain hidden beneath layers of sediment. The discovery has prompted debate. Some scientists initially questioned the dating methods, suggesting that radiocarbon analysis of aquatic plant seeds might yield misleading results due to old carbon sources in lake water. Further studies and independent tests, however, have reinforced the early timeline. If confirmed beyond doubt, the White Sands footprints reshape understanding of early human dispersal in the Americas. They suggest resilience during a challenging climatic period. They suggest adaptation to Ice Age environments. Standing today among the bright dunes of White Sands, it is difficult to imagine the ancient lake that once existed here. The horizon shimmers in heat. The gypsum crystals reflect sunlight intensely, but beneath the surface the lakebed remains, and within it the impressions of people long gone. The footprints are not monumental. They are small, human-sized. Some belong to teenagers, some to children. Their scale makes them intimate. You can place your own foot beside one and see the similarity. 23,000 years separate the two steps, yet the shape remains familiar. The oldest footprints in the Americas do not speak through stone carvings or grand architecture. They speak through absence, the hollow left behind when a foot lifted from wet ground. They remind us that migration was not a single dramatic event. It was a series of quiet journeys across shorelines, across grasslands, across continents, and in the still desert of New Mexico, beneath wind-shaped dunes and endless sky, those ancient steps continue to rest, silent evidence that long before cities, long before pyramids or written history, human beings walked here, leaving behind the simplest and most human trace of all. The giant claw of the moa, a frozen relic from New Zealand. High in the mountains of New Zealand's South Island, in a cold alpine cave where air moves slowly and temperatures remain low year-round, a discovery was made that felt almost impossible. It looked fresh, it looked recent, it looked alive, but it was more than 3,000 years old. This is the story of the giant claw of the moa. In 1986, climbers exploring a cave near Mount Owen uncovered a remarkably preserved foot and claw belonging to an upland moa, a large, flightless bird once native to New Zealand. The skin was still attached, scales remained visible, the curved claws appeared sharp and intact. For a moment, it seemed as though the animal had only recently died, but radiocarbon testing told a different story. The claw belonged to a creature that had walked New Zealand's forests thousands of years ago, long before modern civilization reached these islands. The upland moa, known scientifically as Megalapteryx, Didinus was one of several species of moa that lived across New Zealand. Unlike the famous kiwi, which survives today, moas were large, some species reaching heights of over 3 meters. They were entirely flightless, and they had no natural land predators. New Zealand, isolated for millions of years, evolved without terrestrial mammals like wolves or large cats. Birds filled ecological roles that mammals occupied elsewhere. The moa browsed on shrubs and forest plants. Their strong legs allowed them to move across varied terrain, from lowland forests to alpine slopes. The preserved claw from Mount Owen survived due to unusual conditions inside the cave. Cold temperatures, stable humidity, and limited bacterial activity slowed decomposition. Over time, the tissue dried and mummified rather than rotted. The result is one of the most vivid Ice Age relics ever found in the Southern Hemisphere. When displayed in a museum, the claw is striking. It is large, 3 thick. Toes, dark, keratinous claws curved and pointed. Rough, leathery skin covering bone beneath. It does not resemble a fossilized skeleton, it resembles a foot that might still move. For the Maori people, who arrived in New Zealand around the 13th century, moas were real animals, not prehistoric myths. Early Maori hunted them extensively for food. Within a few centuries, all moa species became extinct. The extinction of the moa is one of the clearest examples of human impact on isolated ecosystems. With no experience of land predators, the birds were vulnerable. Hunting, combined with habitat changes through fire, led to their disappearance. By the time Europeans arrived in New Zealand, the moa existed only in legend. For centuries, Western naturalists debated whether the moa had truly existed or whether it was simply a story. Large bones discovered in swamps and caves eventually confirmed the bird's reality in the 19th century. But bones feel distant. A preserved claw feels immediate. It closes the gap between imagination and reality. Holding the image of that claw in mind, one can almost see the bird stepping through dense forest. Hear leaves shift under its weight. Imagine its heavy body moving slowly across alpine terrain. The upland moa was smaller than some of its relatives, but still impressive in size. It adapted to colder environments, with strong legs and likely thick feathers for insulation. Its disappearance left ecological consequences. Moas were important seed dispersers. Some native plants evolved in partnership with these large birds. Their absence altered forest dynamics permanently. The claw discovered at Mount Owen offers more than physical evidence of extinction. It offers presence. The fine detail of scales and nail reminds us that extinction does not always occur in distant geological epochs. Sometimes it happens within recorded human history. The cave where the claw was found remains cold and quiet. Ice forms in winter. Wind moves faintly at the entrance. Deep inside, darkness persists year-round. In that stillness, a fragment of Ice Age life waited patiently. Thousands of years passed. Climate shifted. People arrived. Forests changed. And yet the claw endured. Today, the preserved foot is housed in New Zealand's museum collections, carefully maintained to prevent deterioration. It is not dramatic in size compared to dinosaur fossils. It is not surrounded by grand architecture, but it carries a quiet power. It is a reminder of a world without mammals, where giant birds ruled the forest floor, a world that changed rapidly when humans arrived. The giant claw of the moa stands as both evidence and warning, evidence of life that once thrived in isolation, warning of how quickly ecosystems can shift. In the alpine silence of New Zealand's South Island, beneath mountains carved by glaciers and clouds that move low across peaks, the memory of the moa lingers, not in legend, alone, but in a preserved foot, frozen in time, holding the shape of a step that will never be taken again. The Ice Maiden of the Andes, the frozen girl of Mount Ampato. High above the sacred valley of Peru, where thin air moves quietly across volcanic peaks and snow rests undisturbed for most of the year, a young girl lay hidden beneath ice for more than 5 centuries. She did not rest in a tomb of stone. She was preserved by the mountain itself. This is the story of the Ice Maiden of the Andes, often called Mummy Juanita. In 1995, anthropologist Johann Reinhard and his team climbed Mount Ampato, a dormant volcano rising more than 6,000 meters above sea level in southern Peru. Melting ice near the summit had begun to expose fragments of cloth and bone. What they uncovered would become one of the most important archaeological discoveries in Andean history. The body of a young Inca girl, remarkably preserved by freezing temperatures. Her skin remained intact. Her hair was braided carefully. Her clothing, finely woven textiles, still wrapped her small frame, even internal. Organs were preserved due to natural freeze-drying in the high-altitude cold. She was approximately 12 to 14 years old at the time of her death. Radiocarbon dating placed her sacrifice around the mid-1400s during the height of the Inca Empire. To understand her presence on Mount Ampato, we must step into the worldview of the Inca civilization. The Inca ruled vast territories across West and South America in the 15th and early 16th centuries. Their empire stretched along the Andes Mountains, connecting highland cities and coastal regions through an advanced road network. Mountains held sacred significance in Inca belief. They were known as apus, powerful spirits that governed weather, fertility, and protection. When major events occurred, the death of an emperor, natural disasters, political transitions, the Inca performed a ceremony known as Cahokia. This ritual involved selecting children of exceptional physical perfection from noble families across the empire. These children were not taken randomly. They were chosen with care and often treated with honour. They travelled long distances to the imperial capital of Cusco before being escorted to high mountain summits. There, they were offered to the gods. Scientific analysis of Juanita's remains revealed that she likely died from a blow to the head. The injury appears swift and controlled. Unlike violent execution, it suggests ritual intent. Toxicology studies found traces of coca leaves and alcohol in her system, substances often used in ceremonial preparation. These may have helped her remain calm or sedated before the final moment. After death, her body was placed in a small stone platform near the summit, wrapped carefully in textiles. The freezing temperatures preserved her in extraordinary condition. For centuries, she remained untouched. Ice sealed her in silence. Only when volcanic heat from a nearby eruption slightly melted the summit, snow did she emerge again into view. The preservation of the Ice Maiden offers rare insight into Inca ritual practice. Unlike mummies created through artificial embalming, her body was naturally freeze-dried by the extreme altitude. Her clothing tells its own story. Fine alpaca wool garments, delicate embroidery, miniature figurines placed beside her, offerings crafted in silver and shell. These items reflect status and ceremony. They reflect belief in connection between earthly life and divine order. From a modern perspective, the idea of child sacrifice is deeply unsettling. Yet within Inca cosmology, Cahokia was considered an act of reverence, not cruelty. The children were believed to become messengers or intermediaries with the gods. Their sacrifice was not seen as loss, but as transformation. Mount Ampato itself rises stark and silent against the Peruvian sky. At such altitude, breathing becomes difficult. Winds move steadily across snowfields. Temperatures remain below freezing even under bright sun. Standing near the summit today, one feels the isolation. The world below seems distant. The sky feels close. It is here that the Ice Maiden rested for over 500 years. After her discovery, Juanita was carefully transported to a laboratory in Arequipa, where she underwent extensive preservation and study. She is now housed in a climate-controlled museum, protected from thawing. Her face remains peaceful, her expression calm. She appears asleep rather than deceased. The Ice Maiden of the Andes is not simply an archaeological artifact. She is a human presence from the 15th century. Her preserved body bridges centuries of time. Through her, we glimpse the spiritual landscape of the Inca world, a civilization that viewed mountains as living forces and believed that sacrifice sustained cosmic balance. In the thin air above Peru, where glaciers once held her quietly beneath snow, the mountain continues to stand. Wind sweeps across its slopes. Ice shifts slowly under sunlight. And far below, in a quiet museum chamber, the Ice Maiden rests once more, not beneath ice, but beneath glass, carrying with her the silent memory of a journey to the summit where earth meets sky. The mass sacrifice at Carthage, the Tophet of Tunisia. On the northern coast of Tunisia, overlooking the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean, lie the ruins of an ancient city that once rivaled Rome. This was Carthage. Founded by Phoenician settlers from Tyre in the 9th century BCE, Carthage grew into a powerful maritime empire. Its ships crossed the Mediterranean. Its traders connected distant cultures. Its generals, like Hannibal, marched armies across mountains. Yet beneath its achievements lies a darker and more debated chapter of history, the story of the Tophet. In a sacred precinct known today as the Tophet of Salambo, archaeologists uncovered thousands of small urns buried beneath stone markers. Inside many of these urns were cremated remains of infants and young children. The site dates from roughly the 8th to the 2nd centuries BCE, covering much of Carthage's existence before its destruction by Rome in 146 BCE. Ancient Greek and Roman writers accused the Carthaginians of practicing child sacrifice, claiming that infants were offered to deities such as Baal-Hamon and Tanit in times of crisis. For centuries, historians debated whether these accounts were propaganda. Carthage was Rome's greatest rival. After Rome destroyed the city during the Third Punic War, Roman narratives shaped how Carthage would be remembered. Accusations of cruelty may have served political purpose. When the Tophet was excavated in the 20th century, the discovery of urns containing infant remains seemed to echo those ancient accusations. More than 20,000 urns have been found at the site. Each contained cremated bone fragments, sometimes accompanied by small animal remains, such as lamb or goat. Stone stelae marked many burials. inscribed with dedications to Tanit and Baal Hammon. The central question remains, were these children sacrificed, or was the Tophet a cemetery for infants who died naturally? Modern scientific analysis has attempted to answer this. Osteological studies indicate that many of the remains belong to very young children, newborns or infants under 2 years old. Some researchers argue that high infant mortality rates in the ancient world could explain the number of burials. In societies without modern medicine, infant death was tragically common. Others point to patterns in the site's organisation and inscriptions that suggest ritual offering rather than ordinary burial. The language on stelae sometimes includes phrases interpreted as fulfillment of vows. Some inscriptions appear formulaic, possibly marking an act of dedication. Chemical and forensic analysis of bones has yielded mixed conclusions. Determining cause of death from cremated infant remains is extremely difficult. The intense heat of cremation alters bone structure. The debate continues among archaeologists and historians. What is certain is that the Tophet was a sacred space. It was not hidden. It was maintained and expanded over centuries. If ritual sacrifice did occur, it was integrated into religious belief rather than secret practice. Carthaginian religion evolved from Phoenician roots. Baal Hammon was associated with fertility and protection. Tanit was a mother goddess figure, symbolizing life and nurturing. The paradox of offering children to deities associated with fertility and protection feels deeply unsettling from a modern perspective, but ancient religious systems operated within different frameworks of understanding. In times of war, famine, or plague, extreme offerings may have been viewed as necessary to restore divine favour. Standing in the ruins of Carthage today, one sees open courtyards, broken columns, and Mediterranean light reflecting off ancient stone. The Tophet area feels quiet. Low walls outline excavation trenches. Stone stelae stand upright, weathered by centuries of sun and wind. There is no dramatic monument here, only rows of urns once buried carefully beneath the soil. The mass sacrifice at Carthage remains one of the most debated topics in ancient Mediterranean history. It forces historians to balance literary sources with archaeological evidence. It challenges us to examine how rival civilizations portrayed one another, and it reminds us that ancient societies, like modern ones, were complex, capable of trade, art, governance, and perhaps rituals that disturb contemporary sensibilities. In 146 BCE, Roman forces razed Carthage to the ground. The city burned. Survivors were enslaved. Rome later rebuilt the site as a Roman colony, but beneath Roman layers, the Tophet endured. Its urns remained sealed, its ashes preserved. In the still Tunisian air, where sea breezes drift across ruins and sunlight warms stone, the Tophet stands as a place of memory and question. Whether cemetery or sacrificial ground, or perhaps something in between, it holds the remains of lives brief and long gone, and within that quiet space by the Mediterranean, history lingers softly, asking not for judgment, but for understanding across the long distance of time. The vampire burials of Poland, the sickle across the throat. In a quiet cemetery in northern Poland, beneath layers of soil and grass, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected, a human skeleton, and across its throat an iron sickle. The blade had been placed deliberately, curved edge facing downward, positioned so that if the deceased attempted to rise, the metal would press against the neck. This was not an isolated burial, it was part of a larger pattern. These are known today as the vampire burials of Poland. The discovery was made near the village of Drausko, where a series of 17th century graves revealed unusual protective measures. Some bodies were buried with sickles placed across their necks or abdomens. Others had stones positioned beneath the chin. The arrangement was not random, it reflected fear. but not fear of the living, fear of the dead. To understand these burials, we must step into the world of early modern Europe, a time when disease spread. Unpredictably, medical knowledge was limited, and unexplained deaths created anxiety within communities. In the 1600s, outbreaks of plague, cholera, and other illnesses devastated towns across Europe. Death could arrive quickly. Entire families might perish within weeks. When death appears without clear cause, people search for explanation. In parts of Eastern Europe, folklore spoke of revenants, the restless dead who could return from their graves to harm the living. These beings were not the elegant vampires of modern fiction. They were feared as bloated, pale figures rising at night to spread illness or misfortune. The word vampire itself emerged from Slavic traditions. Communities developed protective burial practices to prevent suspected individuals from returning. Placing a sickle across the neck was one such method. The curved blade would, in theory, decapitate the body if it attempted to sit upright. Stones beneath the chin prevented the mouth from opening. Other practices across Europe included staking through the chest, weighing down bodies with rocks, or burying individuals face down. The Polish burials are particularly striking because they occurred in otherwise ordinary cemeteries. The individuals were not outcasts or criminals. Their graves were aligned with others, suggesting they were part of the community. Isotopic analysis of their teeth indicates that many were local residents, not outsiders. So why were they treated differently in death? One possibility is that they died under unusual circumstances, sudden illness, unexplained symptoms, or social suspicion. In small communities, deviation from norms could raise fear. If someone died first in a wave of illness, they might be blamed for subsequent deaths. The belief was not necessarily malicious, it was protective. By placing a sickle across the body, the living sought reassurance that death would remain contained. The cemetery at Drosko dates to a time when Christian burial traditions were dominant, yet older folk beliefs persisted alongside official doctrine. The church may have preached one understanding of death, but village customs sometimes followed older paths. Archaeologists examining the skeletons found no evidence of violent trauma consistent with criminal execution. The bodies were laid carefully. The sickles were positioned with intention. The metal blades, now rusted with time, once gleamed in iron. When sunlight falls across the excavation site today, it reveals ordinary earth and grass. There is no dramatic marker indicating vampire graves. Only careful archaeological mapping distinguishes these burials from others. The idea of vampires has since transformed in popular culture, shaped by 19th century literature and modern cinema into romanticized figures. But the Drosko burials remind us that the original fear was grounded in mortality. Disease was invisible. Contagion was misunderstood. If one family member died, others might follow. In the absence of germ theory, explanation took symbolic form. The sickle, a farming tool used to harvest grain, became an instrument of protection. It is a quiet image, a blade resting across bone, a precaution placed by trembling hands centuries ago. The vampire burials of Poland are not evidence of supernatural beings. They are evidence of human anxiety. They show how communities respond to uncertainty. Standing in the Polish countryside today, where fields stretch under wide skies and seasons pass steadily, it is difficult to imagine the fear that once gripped villages during epidemic waves. But beneath the soil, the iron sickles remain, fragile, rusted witnesses to that fear. They remind us that history is not only grand battles and empires, it is also quiet graves, small decisions made in times of distress, and in the stillness of northern Poland, where wind moves softly across grass above forgotten cemeteries, the vampire. Burials rest, not as proof of the undead, but as traces of how the living once tried to guard themselves against the unknown. The forgotten city of Cahokia, America's ancient metropolis. In the flat floodplains near the Mississippi River, just east of present-day St. Louis, rise enormous earthen mounds. From the ground, they appear as gentle hills covered in grass. From the air, their geometry becomes clear. This is Cahokia. Long before European ships reached North America, long before medieval castles dominated Europe, a vast city stood here in what is now Illinois. At its height around 1050 to 1200 CE, Cahokia was the largest urban centre north of Mexico. Archaeologists estimate that between 10,000 and 20,000 people lived here, making it larger than London at the same time. Today, the site is preserved as the Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site, but for centuries it was forgotten. The city was built by people of what archaeologists called a Mississippian culture. These communities constructed massive earthen mounds for ceremonial, political and residential purposes. The largest structure, known as Monk's Mound, still rises more than 30 metres high. It covers over 14 acres at its base. Built entirely from layers of earth carried by hand in woven baskets, it required immense coordination. No draft animals, no wheeled carts, only human labour. Atop Monk's Mound once stood a large wooden building, likely the residence of a powerful leader or spiritual figure. From that elevated position, the city's central plaza would have spread outward below. Cahokia was carefully planned. It featured a grand central plaza used for gatherings and ceremonies. Around it stood more than 100 mounds of varying size and function. Residential areas extended outward, forming neighbourhoods. Wooden palisades enclosed parts of the city, indicating concern for defence or social boundaries. To the west of the main plaza stood a series of large timber circles, often called woodhenge by modern researchers. These posts appear to have functioned as solar calendars. Alignments, with sunrise positions during solstices and equinoxes, suggest astronomical knowledge. Cahokia was not isolated. It was the centre of a vast trade network stretching across much of North America. Marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, and stone from distant quarries have been found here. The city thrived for centuries, but around the 13th century it began to decline. By 1350 it was largely abandoned. The reasons remain debated. Environmental factors may have played a role. The Mississippi River is prone to flooding. Overuse of timber for construction and fuel may have strained local resources. Political or social unrest may have weakened central authority. Climate shifts during the medieval warm period and subsequent cooling may have affected agriculture. There is no clear evidence of invasion or sudden catastrophe. The decline appears gradual. When European settlers arrived centuries later, the mounds remained, but the memory of the city's builders had faded from common awareness. Some early settlers speculated that a lost race had constructed the mounds, unwilling to recognise that Native American ancestors were capable of large-scale urban planning. Modern archaeology corrected this misconception. Cahokia was built by indigenous peoples whose descendants remain present across the region today. Walking across the grassy mounds now, one feels their scale in a quiet way. The earth rises gently underfoot. Trees frame the horizon. The modern city skyline of St. Louis appears faintly in the distance. Yet beneath this calm surface lies the footprint of an ancient metropolis. The forgotten city of Cahokia challenges assumptions about pre-Columbian North America. It demonstrates that complex societies flourished here with political hierarchy, spiritual centres, trade networks, and astronomical awareness. It was not a scattered collection of small villages. It was urban. It was organised. It was powerful. Standing atop Monk's Mound at sunset, the prairie stretches wide. The Mississippi River glimmers beyond trees. Wind moves softly across open space. It is easy to imagine wooden structures rising again, smoke drifting from hearths, voices gathering in the plaza. But the city remains silent. Only earth outlines its memory. Cahokia reminds us that history does not always leave stone monuments. Sometimes it leaves shaped soil, mounds that blend into landscape until viewed from above. And in the quiet fields of Illinois, where grass covers ancient foundations and sky stretches wide above the Mississippi Valley, the forgotten city of Cahokia rests, not erased, but waiting patiently beneath the surface of time. The lost tomb of Alexander, the search for a vanished king. In 323 BCE, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world died suddenly in Babylon. He was only 32 years old. His empire stretched from Greece to India. His name was Alexander the Great. But while his conquests reshaped continents, the location of his final resting place remains unknown. This is the mystery of the lost tomb of Alexander. After Alexander's death, his generals struggled for control of the vast empire he had built. According to ancient sources, his body was prepared with extraordinary care. It was embalmed and placed in a golden sarcophagus. The funeral procession itself became a political symbol. One of his generals, Ptolemy, intercepted the body and transported it to Egypt, a land Alexander had conquered and where he had founded the city of Alexandria. There, in the growing capital on the Mediterranean coast, the body was reportedly placed in a mausoleum known as the Soma, or body. Ancient writers such as Strabo and Plutarch describe a tomb visited by Roman emperors. Julius Caesar is said to have paid respects. Augustus reportedly entered the chamber and placed a golden wreath upon the body. For centuries, the tomb stood as a site of pilgrimage and power. Then it vanished. Alexandria was built upon layers of earlier settlements and has endured earthquakes, fires, invasions, and gradual submergence along its coastline. Much of the ancient city now lies beneath modern streets or underwater. By the late Roman period, references to Alexander's tomb became scarce. Some sources suggest that the golden sarcophagus was replaced with one of glass or crystal after looting. Others indicate that the mausoleum may have been damaged during periods of unrest. No confirmed trace of the tomb has been found. Archaeologists have searched across Alexandria for decades. Excavations in the city centre have uncovered Hellenistic foundations, statues and burial, and chambers. Underwater archaeology has revealed parts of the ancient harbour, including submerged temples and palaces. But Alexander's tomb remains elusive. Some theories place it beneath the modern Mosque of Nabi Daniel in Alexandria. Others propose alternative locations outside Egypt entirely, though historical evidence strongly supports Alexandria as the original burial site. The challenge lies in the city itself. Modern Alexandria is densely populated. Construction over centuries has layered foundations upon ruins. Excavation in urban centres requires delicate negotiation between preservation and daily life. There is also the possibility that the tomb was destroyed beyond recognition. Earthquakes struck Alexandria in antiquity, particularly in the 4th century CE. Rising sea levels altered the coastline. Political upheavals may have led to dismantling of monuments associated with earlier regimes. Alexander's body was more than a relic. It was a symbol of legitimacy. Control over his remains reinforced authority. When Roman emperors visited the tomb, they aligned themselves with his legacy. In death, he remained politically powerful. The lost tomb of Alexander represents more than a missing structure. It represents a gap in continuity. Most great rulers of antiquity left identifiable burial sites, pyramids, mausoleums, monumental tombs. Alexander, who conquered so much, left no confirmed grave. Standing along the Mediterranean coast in Alexandria today, waves move gently against modern harbour walls. The air carries salt and wind. Beneath the water lie fragments of the ancient city. Somewhere beneath layers of sand, stone, and sea, the tomb may still exist, sealed, collapsed, or hidden beneath buildings. Or it may have been dismantled long ago, its materials reused, its location forgotten. The search continues quietly. Archaeologists analyse ancient texts, compare descriptions, and explore newly accessible areas. Each discovery in Alexandria offers small clues about the city's layout, but the exact chamber where Alexander's body once rested remains unknown. The story carries a certain irony. A man who sought to map and control the known world has left behind no certain marker of his own resting place. His empire fragmented after his death. His cities endured. His legend grew. Yet his tomb dissolved into uncertainty. In the fading light over Alexandria's coastline, where ancient foundations meet modern streets, the question remains open. The lost tomb of Alexander may still wait beneath the earth, or it may have already returned fully to dust, and in that quiet absence the conqueror's final mystery endures, not in gold or marble, but in the silent space where history no longer points clearly, leaving only the echo of a name that once commanded the world. The Ural out of place, spiral objects, microscopic mysteries in the mountains. In the remote stretches of the Ural Mountains of Russia, where forests give way to river valleys and mineral-rich soil has long drawn prospectors, a curious discovery was made in the 1990s. Tiny spiral objects, metallic, coiled with precision, some so small they could only be seen under a microscope. These objects would later be described in certain circles as out-of-place artifacts, items allegedly too advanced for the layers of sediment in which they were found. This is the story of the Ural spiral objects. The discoveries were reported primarily in the early 1990s by gold prospectors and geologists working along rivers in the Ural region. While examining sediment samples from riverbanks and streambeds, workers reportedly found small spiral-shaped metal fragments mixed within the sand. The objects varied in size. Some measured only a few millimeters in length, others were microscopic, thinner than a human hair. They appeared as tightly wound coils, almost resembling miniature springs. Laboratory analysis suggested that some were composed of copper, while others reportedly contained tungsten and molybdenum, metals known for their high melting points and industrial use. This detail fueled speculation. Tungsten, for example, requires extremely high temperatures to refine. If these objects were embedded in ancient geological layers, how could they have been manufactured? Some proponents of the mystery suggested advanced prehistoric civilizations. Others speculated about extraterrestrial origins. The Ural Mountains themselves are ancient, among the oldest mountain ranges in the world. Their geological formations date back hundreds of millions of years, but it is important to distinguish between the age of the mountains and the age of river sediments where the objects were found. Most spiral objects were reportedly recovered from river deposits rather than deep, undisturbed bedrock. River sediments are dynamic environments. They shift constantly. Material can be introduced from modern sources and transported downstream. Geologists who examined the objects offered a more grounded explanation. The Ural region has been a centre of mining and industrial activity for decades, particularly during the Soviet era. Mechanical equipment, drilling tools, and industrial components were used extensively in the area. The spiral fragments bear resemblance to tiny metal shavings produced during machining processes, especially from the cutting of metal with lathes or drilling equipment. When metal is machined at high speed, it often curls into tight spiral forms. These spirals can break into small pieces and scatter into surrounding soil. Over time, such fragments could enter river systems and mix with sediment. The composition of tungsten and molybdenum aligns with industrial alloys used in modern manufacturing, particularly in drilling equipment and high-strength tools. The key factor lies in dating. No peer-reviewed studies have conclusively demonstrated that the spiral objects are millions of years old. Claims about ancient sediment layers often rely on assumptions rather than direct dating of the objects themselves. Geological layers in river systems can be complex. Modern materials can settle into older sediments through erosion, animal activity, or water movement. The idea of out-of-place artifacts carries appeal because it suggests hidden chapters of history, advanced technology lost to time. But extraordinary claims require careful verification. In the case of the Ural spiral objects, no credible archaeological context has been established linking them to ancient human civilizations. There are no associated tools, no structures, no supporting artifacts, only isolated metal fragments in a region with known industrial presence. The microscopic scale of many spirals further supports the machining hypothesis. Natural geological processes rarely produce uniform metal coils with consistent curvature. Industrial lathes, however, produce them routinely. Standing in the Ural Mountains today, one sees vast forests, winding rivers, and rocky outcrops shaped by deep time. The landscape feels ancient and undisturbed, but beneath that natural surface lies a history of mining, drilling, and industrial extraction. Human activity leaves traces. Sometimes those traces are small, so small they resemble something from another age. The Ural spiral objects remind us how easily context can shift perception. A tiny coil of metal, removed from its industrial origin, can appear mysterious when found in isolation. But science works by comparison, by examining composition, by understanding processes, by situating objects within broader patterns. In this case, the simplest explanation remains the most consistent with available evidence. The spirals are likely byproducts of modern machining activity carried into sediments by natural processes. Yet the fascination persists. The idea that something small and metallic could challenge established timelines speaks to our curiosity about hidden pasts. In the quiet valleys of the Ural Mountains, where rivers flow steadily past stone and forest, the spiral objects rest as a reminder, not of lost civilizations, but of how mystery often begins with scale. Sometimes, what appears ancient and advanced is simply modern and displaced, and in the stillness of those northern landscapes, beneath wide skies and shifting clouds, the smallest objects can cast the longest questions until examined closely and gently returned to their place in time. The Temple of Seti I and the helicopter, stone, shadows, and hieroglyphs. In the desert town of Abydos, in southern Egypt, there is a temple where the ceiling seems to whisper a strange modern shape. Some visitors look up and see a helicopter carved into ancient stone. Others see a submarine, a jet aircraft, even a tank. And yet, the temple was built more than 3,000 years ago. This is the story of the so-called Abydos helicopter at the Temple of Seti I. The Temple of Seti I was constructed during the 19th dynasty of ancient Egypt, around 1300 BCE, under the reign of Pharaoh Seti I. It stands as one of the most refined and beautifully carved temples in Egypt, dedicated to Osiris and other major deities. Abydos itself was sacred long before Seti's reign. It was associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife, and served as an important pilgrimage site. Kings sought to link themselves symbolically with its religious authority. The temple walls are covered with precise relief carvings, hieroglyphs, and royal names carved deeply into limestone. But high on one architrave beam, near the ceiling, is a cluster of shapes that appear oddly familiar to modern eyes. When photographed from certain angles, the overlapping carvings resemble the silhouette of a helicopter, complete with rotor and tail. This image has circulated widely online. It's often presented as evidence of ancient advanced technology, proof that the Egyptians had knowledge of machines far beyond their time, but the explanation lies not in lost aircraft, but in layered stonework. To understand what happened, we need to understand how ancient Egyptian inscriptions were created and modified. When a pharaoh commissioned a temple, his royal titles were carved prominently into stone. These titles included a throne name and birth name enclosed in cartouches. Seti I's inscriptions originally occupied the beam in question. However, when his son, Ramses II, took the throne, he undertook renovations and additions across Egypt, including at Abydos. It was common practice for new rulers to modify or overwrite earlier inscriptions, replacing a predecessor's name with their own. At the Temple of Seti I, Ramses II filled in some of his father's carved hieroglyphs with plaster and recarved his own names over them. Over time, the plaster deteriorated. The underlying earlier carvings began to show through. The result is a palimpsest, overlapping hieroglyphs from two different reigns occupying the same space. When two sets of carved symbols overlap imperfectly, the combined shapes can appear entirely different from their original forms. This is precisely what happened at Abydos. The helicopter shape is created by the superimposition of hieroglyphs from Seti I and Ramses II. When isolated visually, especially in low-resolution images, the merged carvings resemble modern machinery, but when examined closely and in full context, the individual hieroglyphs become clear. Egyptologists have identified the original inscriptions. They are standard royal titulary, not technical schematics. There are no references anywhere in Egyptian texts to flying machines, mechanical vehicles, or advanced aircraft. The phenomenon is an example of pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive familiar shapes in random or ambiguous patterns. We see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, and sometimes helicopters in hieroglyphs. Standing inside the Temple of Seti I, the ceiling beam does not immediately stand out. It is high above eye level. The carvings are part of a broader decorative program that extends across columns and corridors. The temple itself is extraordinary for entirely different reasons. Its reliefs are among the finest in Egypt. The detail of carving, the clarity of hieroglyphs, and the preservation of pigment in certain chambers make it a masterpiece of New Kingdom artistry. The temple also contains the famous Abydos king list, a carved sequence of pharaohs from early dynasties up to Seti's reign. This list has been invaluable to modern historians in reconstructing Egypt's chronology. Yet it is the helicopter image that draws modern viral attention. Why? Because it bridges past and present in a way that feels impossible. It suggests that something ancient anticipated something modern. It suggests hidden knowledge, but archaeology thrives on context. When examined within historical and epigraphic framework, the carving aligns perfectly with known Egyptian practices. Overwriting inscriptions was common. Erosion was inevitable. The combination creates optical illusion. There is no mystery of aviation concealed in limestone, and yet the fascination persists. Ancient Egypt has long occupied a space in popular imagination as a civilization of lost secrets. Monumental pyramids, precise alignments, and enduring stonework invite speculation. But the true achievements of ancient Egypt require no exaggeration. They mastered stone carving, architectural alignment, logistics, and symbolic art. They did not require helicopters to be remarkable. The Temple of Seti I stands quietly at Abydos, its columns casting long shadows in afternoon light. Tourists walk slowly through halls once filled with incense and chant. The carved beam remains overhead. Its layered hieroglyphs, worn by time, continue to spark curiosity. But when the light shifts and the eye adjusts, the illusion dissolves. The helicopter becomes a cluster of overlapping royal names. The submarine becomes a distorted glyph. The modern shape returns to ancient text, and in that transformation, the real story emerges. Not of forgotten aircraft, but of how time reshaped stone and how the human mind seeks familiarity in the unfamiliar. Under the Egyptian sun, in a temple built for gods and kings, the ceiling holds its layered history patiently. Not a prophecy, not a machine, just carved names, written, rewritten, and slowly revealed again through the quiet erosion of centuries. The mysterious city of Derawar, fortress in the Kholistan Desert. In the vast openness of the Kholistan Desert in Pakistan, where wind moves across endless sand and the horizon feels impossibly distant, a massive fortress rises from the earth like something imagined rather than built. Its walls stretch in a near-perfect square. 40 enormous bastions stand along its perimeter, and from miles away, its silhouette appears against the desert sky as if placed there deliberately to command both land and silence. This is Derawar Fort. Known locally as Chila Derawar, the structure stands in the Bahawalpur region of Punjab, isolated yet imposing, surrounded by sand that shifts slowly with every season. The present fort dates primarily to the 18th century, though the site itself is believed to have older foundations reaching back into earlier regional kingdoms. The original structure was built by a Rajput ruler, Rai Jajabhati, and was later taken over and reconstructed by the Abbasi Nawabs of Bahawalpur in the 1700s, who strengthened it into the monumental fortress that stands today. Its walls rise approximately 30 metres high, constructed from baked brick, forming an immense defensive enclosure that encloses nearly 1.5 kilometres of perimeter. When viewed from above, Derawar Fort appears almost geometric in its precision, its circular bastions repeating rhythmically along straight defensive walls, creating a visual pattern that contrasts sharply with the organic movement of desert dunes around it. But Derawar was not simply a military outpost, it was a guardian of trade. The Cholistan Desert once formed part of important caravan routes connecting Central Asia to the Indian subcontinent. Traders crossed this arid region carrying textiles, spices, salt and precious goods. A fortress like Derawar offered protection, authority and control over movement. Yet the desert keeps older memories as well. Some historians believe that this region may overlap with parts of the ancient Hakra river system, sometimes associated with the lost Saraswati River of early Indus Valley civilization discussions. Archaeological mounds scattered throughout Cholistan suggest settlements thousands of years old once thrived where desert now dominates. The fort itself, however, reflects a later chapter, a time of regional power struggles, shifting alliances, and defensive architecture designed to withstand siege. Standing at the base of its walls, the scale becomes overwhelming. The brickwork feels dense and unyielding. The bastions curve outward like silent sentinels. Inside the fort's walls lie open courtyards, collapsed chambers, and traces of once functional spaces that housed soldiers, administrators, and supplies. Nearby stands the royal necropolis of the Abbasi family, domed tombs rising from the sand, their white marble contrasting with the reddish-brown fort walls. Wind moves through broken corridors, shadows stretch long in afternoon. Silence dominates the landscape. Derawar Fort often appears in photographs as isolated and abandoned, yet it remains structurally intact in many sections. Restoration efforts have occurred intermittently, though the desert climate continues to erode exposed brick. Rainfall is rare but intense when it comes. Temperature swings between scorching summer heat and cooler winter nights. The environment shapes the fortress constantly. There is something cinematic about Derawar's presence in the desert. Its remoteness fuels imagination. Unlike cities surrounded by modern development, Derawar rises almost alone, unmasked by urban noise. This isolation has contributed to its aura of mystery. Some visitors describe the feeling of stepping into another era. The repetition of bastions, the symmetry of walls, the open sky above, It creates a sense of suspended time. Yet historically, Derawar was strategic, not symbolic. It controlled land, it protected resources, it demonstrated authority. The Bahawalpur state, which governed this region until the mid-20th century, relied on such fortifications as expressions of sovereignty. From atop one of the bastions, the desert stretches outward without obstruction. Sand dunes roll gently in every direction. The air carries heat waves during the day, and a quiet chill after sunset. Caravans once approached this structure from afar, its walls visible long before arrival. Water sources in the desert were precious, and fortified wells near Derawar provided life to those crossing barren terrain. Despite its strength, Derawar never became the centre of a dense urban metropolis. It functioned as a fortified outpost and administrative stronghold rather than a sprawling city. Yet its scale gives the impression of something larger. It invites the word mysterious, not because of hidden chambers or lost civilizations within its walls, but because of its setting, because of the way architecture rises in defiance of emptiness. The Kholistan desert itself carries stories older than the fort. Archaeological surveys have identified hundreds of ancient settlement sites buried beneath sand, indicating that this region was once far more fertile than it appears today. Climate shifts transformed grasslands into arid expanses. Rivers changed course, communities relocated. Derawar stands as a later guardian of land already shaped by deeper history. When sunset touches its walls, the brick glows warm red and orange, the sky fades into violet. The fortress appears almost surreal against the fading light. There are no towering skyscrapers nearby, no highways cutting across the view, only desert wind and distant dunes. The mysterious city of Derawar is not mysterious because it hides advanced technology or forgotten empires. It is mysterious because it endures in isolation, because it stands where so little else stands, because it reminds us that power once rose even in the most unforgiving landscapes. And in the quiet of the Kholistan desert, beneath wide Pakistani skies where stars appear sharply after nightfall, Derawar Fort continues to rise, brick upon brick, holding within its walls the memory of caravans, rulers, and the steady passage of time across sand that never truly rests. The stone coffins of Sulawesi, guardians of the highlands. In the highlands of Indonesia's island of Sulawesi, where mist settles gently over terraced hills and dense forests frame distant mountains, there are stone coffins resting quietly in the open air. They are not hidden underground. They are not sealed within grand mausoleums. They sit above the earth, carved from solid rock, shaped carefully into rectangular forms with fitted lids. These are the ancient stone coffins of Sulawesi. Across parts of North Sulawesi and the Toraja Highlands, hundreds of these coffins can still be found, scattered in villages, fields, and forest clearings. Some are small and modest, others are elaborately carved, their lids shaped with human figures, animals, or symbolic designs. In Minahasa, these stone sarcophagi are known as waruga. In the Toraja region, burial traditions evolved into dramatic cliff tombs and stone chambers carved directly into rock faces. The exact origins of the earliest stone coffins are not fully documented, but many date back several centuries, possibly reaching into the late prehistoric period before widespread European contact. Sulawesi itself is an island of remarkable cultural diversity. Its mountainous terrain encouraged the development of distinct communities, each maintaining unique traditions and burial customs. The stone coffins reflect a worldview in which death was not an abrupt ending, but a transformation into ancestral presence. In Minahasan culture, the waruga were traditionally used for family burials. The deceased was placed inside the stone chamber in a seated or fetal position, symbolizing return to the womb of the earth. The lid was then sealed carefully. These coffins were often placed near villages, sometimes arranged in clusters, creating open-air ancestral landscapes. Carvings on the lids sometimes depict the occupation or social role of the deceased: a warrior, a farmer, a leader, offering insight into daily life centuries ago. The choice of stone as material speaks to permanence. Wood decays, earth shifts, but carved rock endures. Sulawesi's volcanic geology provided suitable stone for shaping these heavy sarcophagi. Crafting them required time and skill, suggesting that burial was an important communal act. In the Toraja highlands of South Sulawesi, burial traditions developed into some of the most visually striking in Southeast Asia. Here, cliffs were carved with chambers to hold coffins. Wooden effigies called tautau were placed on balconies overlooking valleys, representing the deceased. While not identical to the Minahasan Waruga, these practices reflect a shared reverence for ancestral presence in physical form. The landscape itself contributes to the atmosphere of these burial sites. Sulawesi's hills rise steeply, covered in lush vegetation. Clouds drift low over terraced rice fields. The air feels humid, alive with insects and distant birdsong. And among this vibrant environment, the stone coffins remain still. Some stand upright, others tilt slightly as soil shifts beneath them. Many have been weathered by centuries of rain and moss. Colonial influence in the 19th century altered burial practices. Christian missionaries discouraged traditional interments, and public health concerns led to the prohibition of above-ground coffins in certain regions. As a result, many Waruga were relocated or left unused, yet they were not erased. Today, they remain as cultural heritage, reminders of older cosmologies. Archaeologists studying the stone coffins have examined skeletal remains, carving styles, and placement patterns to understand social structure and belief systems. Grave goods have been found in some coffins, ceramics, metal objects, personal ornaments, indicating care and ritual significance. There is no evidence of mass sacrifice or violence associated with these burials. They were part of ordinary life cycles: birth, growth, death, and remembrance. Standing beside one of these stone coffins, one notices the weight of the lid, the texture of chisel marks still faintly visible. The interior space is small, intimate. It was not meant to display grandeur. It was meant to shelter memory. Unlike monumental pyramids or vast necropolises, the stone coffins of Sulawesi feel personal. They are scaled to families, to communities, to villages that once gathered around them. The humid tropical climate continues to shape them slowly. Lichens spread across surfaces. Rain softens edges. Vegetation grows around their bases. But their forms remain recognizable. Rectangular base, fitted lid, carved detail. The stone coffins of Sulawesi remind us that across the world, cultures developed distinct yet equally profound relationships with death. In Egypt, bodies were mummified. In the Andes, they were placed high on mountains. In Sulawesi, they were sealed within stone and kept close to the living. Landscape. The coffins do not speak loudly. They do not demand attention. They rest quietly among fields and trees, guardians of stories passed through generations. And in the mist-covered highlands of Indonesia, where mountains hold clouds and valleys echo with distant village life, the stone coffins remain, solid, enduring, and gently woven into the rhythm of a land where ancestors are never entirely forgotten. The underground temple of Osiris, the Osireion of Abydos. Behind the grand limestone walls of the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, beyond its decorated halls and carved reliefs, there lies a structure that feels older, darker, and far more mysterious. It is partially sunken into the earth. It is built from enormous granite blocks, and for much of the year it stands surrounded by water. This is the Osireion. Located at Abydos in Upper Egypt, The Osireion sits directly behind the main Temple of Seti I, aligned precisely along the same central axis. From above, it appears almost like an extension of the temple complex, yet its architectural style feels strikingly different. While the Temple of Seti I features refined carvings and detailed hieroglyphic decoration, the Osireion is austere and monumental. Its core chamber is constructed from massive red granite blocks, some weighing over 60 tons. 10 granite pillars stand in 2 parallel rows, supporting architraves above. The scale is heavy, deliberate, almost archaic in appearance. Because of this style, early explorers speculated that the Osireion was far older than the temple beside it. Some even suggested it dated back to a lost pre-dynastic civilization, but inscriptions found within the structure connect it clearly to Seti I of the 19th dynasty, around 1300 BCE. The Osireion was likely built as a symbolic tomb or cenotaph dedicated to Osiris, the Egyptian god of the afterlife, resurrection, and regeneration. Abydos was one of the most sacred sites in Egypt, believed to be the burial place of Osiris himself. Pilgrims travelled there for centuries to connect with the god's mythic resting place. The Osireion appears to have been designed as a representation of the primeval mound, the mythical island that rose from the waters of chaos at the beginning of creation. Its central chamber sits below ground level, intentionally constructed lower than the surrounding terrain. Water often accumulates around its base due to the natural water table of the Nile floodplain. This creates the striking image of stone pillars rising from still water. The atmosphere inside the Osireion feels different from typical temple spaces. Light filters down faintly from above. The air is cooler. The granite surfaces reflect softly in the water. There are no elaborate painted scenes dominating the main chamber. Instead, there is mass and silence. Some ceiling sections contain later inscriptions, including portions of the Book of Gates and other funerary texts added during subsequent reigns. These reinforce the connection between the structure and afterlife symbolism. The heavy megalithic style of the Osireion has drawn comparisons to earlier Old Kingdom architecture, and even to distant megalithic traditions elsewhere in the world. Its simplicity contrasts with the decorative richness of New Kingdom temples, but archaeological evidence places its construction firmly within Seti I's reign. Its unusual design was intentional. It was meant to evoke timelessness. In Egyptian cosmology, Osiris represented death, followed by renewal. The myth tells of his murder, dismemberment, and eventual resurrection, becoming ruler of the underworld. Water symbolized both life and primordial chaos. A subterranean chamber surrounded by water would therefore align closely with theological meaning. The Osireion was not built for public gathering like temple courtyards. It was symbolic, ritualistic, possibly used in ceremonies reenacting aspects of Osiris's myth. Over centuries, sand gradually filled parts of the structure. Flooding and sediment accumulation buried sections until excavation in the early 20th century revealed its full layout again. Today, visitors can look down into the chamber from elevated walkways. The granite blocks remain tightly fitted, their edges sharp despite thousands of years. The water level rises and falls with seasonal changes. The underground. Temple of Osiris is often labelled mysterious because of its appearance. It feels hidden. It feels older than it is. But mystery does not require lost civilizations or secret technologies. It can arise simply from intention and symbolism. Seti I was one of Egypt's most ambitious builders. His temple at Abydos is among the most beautiful surviving monuments of the New Kingdom. Constructing an underground symbolic tomb behind it reinforced his connection to divine legitimacy. He aligned himself with Osiris. He embedded his reign within eternal myth. Standing within the Osireion, one hears subtle echoes. Water laps gently against stone. Granite pillars rise heavily toward a ceiling, partially open to the sky. It feels removed from ordinary time. And perhaps that was the purpose, to create a space that did not feel contemporary, to create a chamber that embodied the beginning of the world and the cycle of rebirth. The underground temple of Osiris is not evidence of forgotten high technology. It is evidence of architectural theology. It demonstrates how ancient Egypt expressed belief not only through words and images, but through space itself, below ground, surrounded by water, anchored in stone. In the quiet town of Abydos, beneath desert sun and drifting sand, the Osireion remains, a deliberate descent into myth, carved in granite, reflecting the still waters of eternity, where creation and resurrection were imagined to begin. Cave of the Crystals, legends beneath Naka. Deep beneath the surface of northern Mexico, below layers of rock and desert heat, there exists a chamber that does not feel entirely real. Its walls are not rough stone. Its ceiling is not dark and jagged. Instead, enormous translucent crystals rise in every direction, some stretching over 11 meters long, taller than a 2-story building. This is the Cave of the Crystals in Naka. Located in the state of Chihuahua, the cave was discovered in 2000 by miners working nearly 300 meters underground in the Naka lead and silver mine. While drilling through rock, they broke into a hidden chamber. What they found appeared almost otherworldly. Massive beams of selenite, a crystalline form of gypsum, filled the space like frozen pillars of light. The air inside was nearly unbearable. Temperatures reached up to 58 degrees Celsius, with humidity approaching 100%. Without specialized cooling suits and breathing equipment, a person could survive inside for only minutes. Yet within that extreme environment, some of the largest natural crystals ever discovered had grown slowly over hundreds of thousands of years. The cave's formation is a story of geology, not legend. Millions of years ago, magma chambers beneath the Naka mountain heated mineral-rich groundwater. As hot water saturated with calcium sulfate slowly cooled over time, gypsum crystals began to form. Unlike most caves, which form through dissolution of rock, the Cave of the Crystals formed through deposition. Crystal growth requires stability. Temperature must remain consistent. Water must remain saturated. In Naka, conditions remained remarkably steady for an immense span of time. The crystals grew slowly, perhaps only millimeters per century, until they reached astonishing size. The largest crystal discovered measured over 11 meters in length and weighed an estimated 55 tons. Walking inside the chamber, researchers described a surreal experience. Crystals crisscrossed the floor at every angle. Some lean diagonally, others rise vertically like columns in a cathedral. Light reflects softly through translucent surfaces, creating a glow that feels almost internal. Because of its extreme conditions, scientific exploration of the cave has been limited. Researchers must wear refrigerated suits to avoid overheating. Even then, visits are short. After mining operations ceased and groundwater pumping stopped, the cave gradually refilled with water, submerging many of the crystals once again. This natural reflooding protects them from deterioration. Yet alongside the scientific explanation, legends began to grow. The Cave of the Crystals was quickly described online as a hidden alien chamber. Some speculated that its geometry was artificial. Others suggested it was evidence of advanced lost civilizations. The sheer size and clarity of the crystals encouraged imagination. It feels as though nature should not produce form so precise. But crystallography explains otherwise. Gypsum crystals form through ordered molecular arrangement. Given time and stable conditions, growth continues uninterrupted. In most environments, temperature fluctuates too much for crystals to grow beyond modest size. Naka was different. The heat and mineral saturation created perfect circumstances. The legends surrounding the cave reflect something deeper, a human reaction to scale and symmetry. When natural formations exceed expectation, we reach for extraordinary narratives. We imagine hidden energies, unknown technologies. But the truth, grounded in geology, is equally remarkable. No sculptor shaped these crystals. No civilization carved them. They grew slowly in darkness, long before human history reached the Americas. The Nacre mine itself sits in an arid desert landscape. Above ground, temperatures are high, and the terrain appears dry and harsh. It is difficult to imagine that beneath this surface lies a chamber once filled with superheated water and towering crystal formations. Yet Earth's interior is dynamic. Heat rises, minerals dissolve and redeposit, pressure-shaped structure. Standing inside the cave of the crystals, even briefly, researchers describe a sense of fragility despite the immense size of the formations. The crystals are brittle. A single misstep could cause damage. Preservation has become a priority. When exposed to cooler air, some crystals begin to degrade. The environment that created them must be maintained to keep them intact. The cave of the crystals is not easily accessible. It is not open for tourism. It remains largely protected within the flooded mine. This inaccessibility adds to its mystique. Hidden deep below ground, surrounded by darkness, guarded by heat. Yet its story is not one of lost technology or alien design. It is a story of patience, of time measured not in years but in geological epochs. In the quiet desert of Chihuahua, where sun scorches the surface and wind moves across open land, an underground chamber continues to rest beneath layers of stone. Crystals grow where water and heat still meet. The cave of the crystals stands as one of the most extraordinary natural formations on Earth, not because it defies science, but because it fulfills it so perfectly. And deep within Nacre, where light rarely reaches and heat presses close, the crystals remain, silent, luminous and shaped by the slow, relentless artistry of the planet itself. The Lothal dockyard mystery, harbour of the Indus. On the flat coastal plains of present-day Gujarat, not far from the Gulf of Kambat, lies the archaeological site of Lothal, one of the southernmost cities of the ancient Indus Valley civilization, a Bronze Age culture that flourished between roughly 2600 and 1900 BCE and developed one of the world's earliest examples of urban planning, standardized architecture, and long-distance trade networks. Today the site appears modest, marked by low brick foundations and quiet earthworks under the Indian sun, yet buried within its layout is a structure that has generated decades of scholarly debate. A vast rectangular basin built of kiln-fired bricks, measuring over 200 metres in length, with thick retaining walls and an inlet channel that once connected it to an ancient waterway. The central question surrounding this basin is deceptively simple, yet historically significant. Was this the world's earliest known dockyard, purpose-built to accommodate ships engaged in maritime trade, or was it a large water reservoir constructed to manage seasonal water supply in a tidal environment? The excavation of Lothal began in the 1950s under the direction of Indian archaeologist S.R. Rao, who identified the basin as a dockyard based on its structural features, its proximity to what appeared to be a raised warehouse platform, and its geographical relationship to ancient river channels that may have linked the settlement to the Arabian Sea. The Indus Valley civilization was already known for its urban sophistication, visible in cities such as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, where streets were laid out on grid patterns, drainage systems were integrated beneath residential blocks, and standardized brick ratios were used across vast regions, suggesting coordinated engineering knowledge. Lothal fit comfortably within this broader pattern of careful design, yet its coastal orientation distinguished it from many inland Indus settlements and introduced the possibility that maritime trade played a central role in its development. Archaeological findings at Lothal strongly support the idea that the city was engaged in extensive commercial exchange. Thousands of beads made from carnelian and other semi-precious stones were discovered at the site, many drilled with extraordinary precision using techniques that indicate advanced craftsmanship. Similar beads have been found in Mesopotamian archaeological contexts, and ancient Mesopotamian texts refer to trade with a region known as Meluha, widely interpreted by scholars as the Indus Valley region. These records describe ships arriving with timber, ivory, precious stones, and other goods, implying established maritime routes connecting South Asia to the broader Near Eastern world. If Lothal functioned as a port, then the basin could have served as a protected docking area where vessels were loaded and unloaded, with goods transferred directly to the adjacent warehouse platform for storage and redistribution. The engineering of the basin itself appears deliberate and robust. Its walls are constructed of baked bricks laid in uniform alignment, thick enough to withstand significant hydraulic pressure. A spillway system suggests that excess water could be drained to prevent structural damage during high tides or heavy monsoon rains. Geological studies indicate that during the 3rd millennium BCE, tidal channels and river distributaries may have extended closer to the site than they do today, meaning that what now appears inland may once have been directly accessible to seaworthy vessels navigating shallow estuarine waters. Over millennia, river courses shift, sediment accumulates, and coastlines change, making it difficult to reconstruct precisely how the landscape looked during the height of the Indus civilization. However, sediment analysis and remote sensing studies support the idea that navigable waterways existed near Lothal during its occupation. Despite this compelling evidence, some scholars propose alternative interpretations. They argue that the basin may have functioned as a freshwater reservoir designed to store water for urban use in a region subject to seasonal fluctuations. The presence of silt deposits within the basin raises questions about long-term maintenance and whether it would have remained sufficiently deep for docking without constant dredging. Furthermore, no preserved remains of wooden ships or maritime equipment have been found at the site, although such materials rarely survive in tropical environments after thousands of years. The absence of deciphered Indus inscriptions further complicates interpretation, as the script of the civilization remains undeciphered, leaving archaeologists to rely solely on material evidence rather than written explanation. What makes Lothal particularly fascinating is not merely the dockyard hypothesis itself, but the broader implications it carries about the capabilities of the Indus Valley civilization. This was a society that demonstrated consistent urban planning across vast distances, used standardized weights and measures to regulate trade, and maintained drainage systems that rivaled those of much later civilizations. If they were capable of coordinating large-scale brick production, organizing labor for citywide construction, and sustaining interregional trade networks, then the engineering of a tidal dock would not seem beyond their abilities. The basin's precise geometry and integration into the urban layout suggest intentional design rather than incidental formation, and its proximity to industrial and storage areas reinforces the interpretation that economic activity shaped the city's structure. Lothal also provides evidence of resilience and environmental adaptation. Flood layers at the site reveal that the settlement experienced repeated inundations, likely due to monsoon surges or shifting river channels. Rebuilding phases indicate that inhabitants attempted to repair and reinforce structures after such events, demonstrating awareness of environmental risk. Ultimately, however, the broader decline of the Indus Valley civilization around 1900 BCE, often attributed to climate shifts, changing river systems, and possible trade disruptions, appears to have led to the gradual abandonment of Lothal. The basin fell silent, its waters receded, and its bricks were eventually buried beneath sediment. Standing at the edge of the basin today, one encounters an austere yet evocative landscape. The rectangular depression lies open to the sky, its brick walls weathered but still clearly defined, and the surrounding plains stretch outward under a quiet horizon. There is no water in the basin now, no visible sign of ships or bustling trade, yet the geometry alone invites contemplation. Whether dockyard or reservoir, the structure reflects careful planning and technical knowledge embedded within a Bronze Age society that operated without monumental palaces or grandiose tombs, yet achieved remarkable coherence in urban design. The mystery of Lothal persists, not because it defies scientific explanation, but because it challenges assumptions about early maritime infrastructure and the scale of Bronze Age connectivity. If the basin functioned as a dock, it would represent one of the earliest known examples of purpose-built port architecture in human history, predating classical Mediterranean harbours by centuries. Even if it served as a reservoir, its size and construction still demonstrate advanced hydraulic understanding. In either case, Lothal stands as a testament to the Indus civilization's capacity for organised engineering and economic integration. As evening light settles across the Gujarat plains and long shadows stretch across the ancient bricks, the basin of Lothal remains quietly intact, preserving within its walls the imprint of design decisions made 4,000 years ago. It does not proclaim its function with inscriptions or dramatic ornamentation, yet its measured proportions and structural logic continue to invite careful study. In that stillness lies the enduring question of how this Bronze Age community balanced land and water, trade and environment, permanence and adaptation, leaving behind a rectangular form in baked clay that still holds its mystery in the quiet earth of Western India.